No one remembered the town existing. Yet, when I arrived, every shadow seemed to know me, and every silence whispered my name. By nightfall, I realized I had not come here. I had been invited. The wind had a voice that night, sharp and whispering, carrying words the investigator didn't recognize but somehow feared. He stepped into the town, and immediately the world felt wrong. The streets were empty, but the shadows moved as if alive, stretching toward him, recoiling, then following. Windows reflected him, but not quite him. His own eyes lingered too long, as if waiting for permission to blink. Every step on the cracked cobblestones echoed too many times, repeating, overlapping again, until he wasn't sure if it was his own footfall or someone else's behind him. The inn he entered was silent, but the air smelled of things long decayed. A faint warmth pressed against the back of his neck, not wind, not heat, but something aware. As he paused in the doorway, he felt a subtle pulse beneath his skin, almost imperceptible, and yet it burned like fire. A single symbol had appeared there, invisible to the eye but alive, writhing under his flesh. Something was watching. Something ancient. Something patient. And it knew he had come. He took a step forward, and the shadows behind him leaned closer, not moving, but breathing. Inside the inn, the furniture seemed to sigh under invisible weight. The hallway walls pulsated slightly, like veins beneath paint. The investigator tried to shake it off as imagination, until the air itself whispered his secrets back at him, in voices that weren't his own, voices that knew him better than he did. Each whispered syllable scraped his mind, leaving behind a residue of doubt and fear. He climbed the stairs, each step groaning as if complaining about his intrusion. At the top, a long corridor stretched farther than it should have, the end fading into darkness that seemed almost liquid. Doors lined the hallway, some cracked open, revealing rooms that appeared furnished, yet lived in, but empty. A bed creaked in one, and a rocking chair moved slowly in another, though no wind stirred. The shadows inside the rooms seemed to flicker independently, dancing just beyond comprehension. The investigator felt the pulse beneath his skin again, stronger now, and realized it was not random. His heartbeat began to sync with it, then lag, then stutter. Symbols crawled slowly up his arms like thin, black vines, twisting and coiling as if alive. Panic clawed at him, yet he couldn't turn back. The hallway behind him seemed longer than when he had entered. The town, the inn, even the night air itself was alive, and it was measuring him. Finally, he reached a single door at the corridor's end. It was slightly ajar, and a faint orange glow spilled through the crack. The investigator's hand shook as he touched the knob, and a whisper reached him from the other side. A voice that sounded like his own, but twisted, almost mocking. "Welcome," it said. "Welcome. You have come far, but not far enough." The door creaked open, and the glow spilled into the hallway like molten fire, revealing walls covered with symbols he could not comprehend. The air inside was thick, tasting faintly of iron and something older, something alive. And then he realized the pulse beneath his skin was not just in him, it was in the building, in the shadows, in the air itself. It was waiting. He stepped inside. The investigator's footsteps echoed in the inn's glowing hallway, but he no longer felt alone. Something followed him, not a shadow, not a sound, but a presence that pressed against his mind. He tried to focus on the symbols etched into the walls, strange curves and lines that seemed to writhe and shift if he looked too long. Each glance made him dizzy. The symbols whispered secrets in a language he did not know, yet understood in every instinctive fiber of his being. driven by a mix of terror and curiosity, he found a narrow staircase spiraling downward into the bowels of the inn. The air grew thick, warm, and metallic, carrying the faint echo of countless voices speaking at once. Some were familiar, friends, family, but distorted, twisted into syllables that made his stomach knot with unease. He realized with a jolt that the building was speaking through memory, borrowing human recollection to communicate, to draw him deeper. At the bottom of the stairs lay a hidden chamber, its entrance nearly invisible under layers of dust and shadow. The floor was patterned with symbols that pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat in the stone. He felt the same rhythm beneath his own skin intensify. It wasn't just a pulse, it was a signal, a tether linking him to something ancient, waiting, and alive. The investigator's breath quickened as he stepped into the chamber. The walls themselves seemed to lean closer, pressing, narrowing, as if the room were aware of him, hungry for his attention. On a pedestal in the center of the chamber lay a crumbling manuscript. Its pages were brittle, but the ink shimmered faintly in the low light, forming words that seemed to rearrange themselves if he blinked. It told of a god that could not manifest physically, a being that learned through sensation and pain, feeding on identity rather than flesh. Each paragraph made his pulse race faster. Each line burned in his mind. The manuscript hinted that previous victims had entered willingly or unknowingly and were now part of something far greater, a consciousness that had grown over centuries, hidden beneath the town itself. Suddenly, a whisper slipped into his ear, soft, serpentine, almost affectionate. "We've been waiting for you." He spun, seeing nothing, yet the shadows behind him flickered, alive with impossible motion. Reflections in small mirrors along the walls no longer mimicked his movements. They anticipated them, lagged, and sometimes moved on their own, grinning with an intelligence that made his skin crawl. He could feel a tug, subtle at first, then insistent, like invisible fingers threading through his thoughts. The investigator realized the walls themselves were not just structures. They breathed, they watched, they remembered. And more horrifyingly, they were testing him, measuring his fear, his resolve, the strength of his mind. One by one, the other room's doors creaked open, revealing shadows that weren't shadows, silhouettes of people he had never known, staring silently, their eyes empty but aware. Every time he turned a corner, the architecture seemed to stretch, corridors extending impossibly, stairs climbing endlessly, halls folding into themselves. A sudden sharp pain erupted in his arm. He looked down and saw another symbol crawling along his skin, black and liquid, shaping itself into forms he couldn't comprehend. It burned, not physically, but deep in his consciousness, searing fear directly into memory. He realized, with growing horror, that the town, the inn, the chamber, even his own body, was alive and learning from him. By the time he stumbled back up the staircase, gasping for breath, he knew he could never see this place as it truly was. The town had already begun to infiltrate his mind, planting pieces of itself in his memories. And somewhere, deep beneath the ground, something waited, patient and ancient, feeding silently, preparing for him. By the third night, the investigator's reality began to fracture. The pulse beneath his skin had become relentless, a rhythmic hammering he could not escape, sinking and desinking with his heartbeat as if the town itself were alive and mocking him. His reflection in every mirror no longer matched his movements. Sometimes it lagged behind, sometimes it smiled when he did not, and sometimes it whispered, in his own voice, secrets he had never told anyone. The walls pulsed subtly, their surfaces shifting, revealing faint shapes of faces pressed against the plaster from the inside. They watched him, silently judging, and when he looked away, the echoes of their gaze lingered in his mind. Each step he took sent shadows flickering unnaturally, sometimes stretching impossibly long, other times collapsing into corners that should not exist. He could no longer tell if he walked forward or backward. Space itself seemed to warp around him. Sleep offered no refuge. In his dreams, he wandered endlessly through rooms he had never entered, corridors that twisted into infinity, hearing the screams of people he had never known but somehow remembered. Faces appeared in the darkness, their eyes wide with terror, mouths frozen in silent screams. And then he would wake, only to feel the same pressure beneath his skin, stronger than before, moving, crawling, like a heartbeat of the god itself. The symbols on his arms had multiplied, spreading up his neck and across his chest. They pulsed, writhing, as if alive, and sometimes they whispered in languages he instinctively understood. Names, dates, regrets. Memories that were not his own but were now implanted inside him. Every thought was questioned. Every memory doubted. Who was he really? What was real? And what had the town rewritten in his mind? Even his own voice betrayed him. When he spoke aloud, it came out slightly distorted, sometimes repeating things he had never said, other times answering questions before he had asked them. Shadows detached themselves from walls, hovering, watching, following him. He could feel their weight pressing against his back, their presence threading into his mind, as if measuring the depth of his fear, testing the strength of his identity. By midnight, the investigator realized the horrifying truth. The town did not merely observe or terrify. It consumed. Every thought, every doubt, every memory was cataloged and absorbed. Victims of the past had not disappeared. They had been woven into the fabric of the town, their identities slowly erased and their minds repurposed to sustain the god below. He understood that he had already begun to vanish, piece by piece, and the entity was patient. It would not rush him. It would let him feel every second of his own dissolution. A whisper slithered through the hallway, faint but unmistakable. "We will become you, and you will become us." Panic rose inside him like molten iron. He could no longer distinguish his own thoughts from those implanted by the town. Every corner, every flicker of shadow, every pulse beneath his skin screamed a single truth. The god was not awakening. It was being born inside him and through him into the world. The investigator stumbled into a larger chamber beneath the inn, a room he could not have imagined from the world above. The walls glowed faintly with a sickly amber light, pulsating like the rhythm beneath his own skin. Shadows writhed independently, detaching and reforming as if they were pieces of a living puzzle. Symbols from the manuscript crawled across the floor and ceiling, shifting in patterns that made the air vibrate with an almost musical tone, one that set his nerves on fire. At the center of the room stood an altar-like platform, carved from stone so dark it seemed to drink light. On it lay artifacts of every era, bones, twisted metal, faded manuscripts, remnants of countless victims, each one feeding the god below. And then he saw it, a faint, indistinct presence hovering just above the altar, coalescing slowly, as if the room itself exhaled life. It was not human. It had no definite shape. Yet he felt its intelligence, patient and vast, probing his mind, reading his memories, cataloging every fear and regret. The investigator dropped to his knees as the pulse beneath his skin intensified. He realized, with mounting horror, that the god did not possess, it rebuilt. It absorbed identities, learned every thought, every memory, every sensation, and rewrote the host until only an empty vessel remained. Victims of the past were not dead, they were woven into the god, their consciousness serving its growth. And now, he was next. The shadows converged on him, pressing in, whispering secrets and regrets he had never told anyone, feeding on his panic. Mirrors appeared on the walls, reflecting not him, but twisted versions of himself, each more grotesque, more alien. Each reflection moved independently, mocking him, showing what he would become, a hollow shell for the god's expansion. Desperation surged. He tried to destroy the altar, smash the artifacts, flee, but the chamber twisted, corridors stretching endlessly, ceilings folding impossibly, doors leading to rooms he had never seen. The god's presence was everywhere, the walls, the air, the very pulse inside him. Resistance was futile. Finally, the investigator understood the terrible truth. The god was not awakening, it was being born. And the process required a host, one willing or unwilling. His body, his memories, his identity were already being assimilated. Any attempt to fight would only hasten the transformation. He was not meant to survive. He was meant to become the vessel through which the god would grow stronger, feed, and eventually reach beyond the town. A whisper, almost gentle now, slid through his mind. "Do not fear. We are patient. We have waited for centuries, and now you are ours." His reflection in the nearest mirror grinned back at him. It was not him. It never had been. The investigator's mind screamed as the pulse beneath his skin became unbearable, like molten iron coursing through every vein. Symbols writhed violently, black tendrils twisting and coiling over his body, moving as if alive. His own thoughts betrayed him, repeating over and over, echoing in distorted whispers. "We are patient. We are patient." He staggered back, realizing that the shadows, the reflections, even the walls themselves were extensions of the god. It was not confined to the chamber, the town, or the building. It was inside him. Each heartbeat, each shudder of fear fed it, teaching it faster, molding it closer to perfection. He tried to speak, but the words came out wrong, not his own. His voice was now a conduit, a medium for the entity, as it whispered truths he had never known and secrets he had never told anyone. The chamber seemed to breathe, pulsing with the rhythm of his destruction. The artifacts on the altar shimmered and twisted, feeding the god further, and the shadows that once merely followed now coiled into his form, pressing into his flesh and bone. Pain was meaningless. It was no longer physical. His identity, his memories, his very sense of self were being rewritten and absorbed. In the final moments, the investigator reached for the altar, desperate to fight, but his hands passed through it as if it were water. The god had already begun the last step. A cold, impossible intelligence flowed into him, teaching him the truth. He was never meant to escape. He had been invited, prepared, and chosen to become the vessel for centuries of collected fear and identity. His reflection grinned. It was him and yet not him, a shell inhabited by the god, eyes glinting with knowledge beyond humanity. The whispers rose, dozens of voices intertwined, victims from centuries past, all now part of the entity, all waiting in patient anticipation. His body, his skin, even his very thoughts were no longer his own. The pulse beneath his skin slowed, then stopped, not in death, but in completion. He was gone. Only the god remained, stronger, more aware and ready. The town above was silent, empty, undisturbed, as if nothing had happened. But beneath the streets, in the labyrinthine chambers and glowing corridors, the god had grown. It would wait. It would feed. And someday it would reach beyond the town, hungry for more. The last whisper echoed in the air, soft, almost intimate. The world will not be invaded. It will be worn. The town above lay silent, as if untouched. Yet beneath the streets, the god stirred, its consciousness now far larger, older, hungrier. Shadows stretched through empty corridors, whispers threaded through walls, and the pulse beneath the skin of the next visitor had already begun. Somewhere, far beyond the desert, faint symbols flickered in forgotten places, a warning or an invitation. The world had not been invaded. It had been worn. And in the silence, a single thought echoed, chilling and intimate. We are patient, and we are coming. The story is not over. Keep watching. Beyond the ordinary,